Hi, everybody. My name is Mason Slate, and this is Level Zero Literacy, a new podcast wherein myself and two of my close friends, Sam and Buck, are going to be discussing narrative video games, the stories of those games, and what they mean to us. This first episode will be on the game Road 96, and it will contain full spoilers for the game, as will every episode. It will also include discussion of some sensitive topics, which will include, but are not limited to, fascism, child trafficking, and child assault. Listener discretion is advised, and thank you for listening.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Level Zero Literacy. My name is Samuel, and I am joined here today by Mason and Buck.
Hi, everybody.
Guys.
Hello.
This is our first episode, so we did want to kind of lead in with a little bit of an introduction about the show, what we're doing, and a little bit about ourselves. So I'm going to roll right into it. So Level Zero Literacy, what we're trying to do is Mason came up with this excellent idea of kind of doing a video game book club where we take games with a specific literary purpose. And I want Mason to kind of explain his vision in that so that you guys can get a good idea of what was going on in his head when he came up with it. Mason?
Yeah, so I think as we sort of move forward in time, game development becomes bigger budget, game development becomes a more open sort of creative expression for more people, that we have a lot of games that narratively are as dense, are as have as much to say as like some of like the finer literature, some as other creative art forms, and I wanted to have a place to talk about what I think and what you two think are some of the sort of shining examples of narrative, story-driven artwork in the video gaming space. And I want, the best way I could figure to talk about that would be like a book club. And so we've over the series of episodes, we're going to pick out week by week one game that we believe is narratively strong, that has something to say about the world or some big idea to communicate through its stories. And we're just going to talk about it, what we like, what we don't like, how well we think it communicates what it's trying to do, what the sort of larger themes are, what it has to say about the world, that kind of thing.
So, and to let you get to know us a little bit better, I've prepared some introductory questions, which I'm going to ask the group. Just to give you a little bit of a concept of our history with video games, our history with works of fiction, and kind of just to give you an idea before we lead into our game of topic today. So, first question is, what was your first console and your first video game? For me personally, my first console was a Nintendo 64. I want to say my first video game was probably Mario Party 2. But it might have been, Super Mario 64, one of those other early titles.
So for me, the actual answer to this question is like Defender on Atari. But that's not the first games that I really got into. The first game and console that I owned and played was Mega Man X on the Super Nintendo. I was obsessed with that game as a kid.
That's so sick, actually. My first console was the PlayStation 1, and I actually had two first video games, got them the same day I got the console, were Metal Gear Solid and Final Fantasy VII. And I was 6 years old, way too young for both of those games.
All right, what is your favorite video game of all time? And give us like 1 to 2 cents as to why that is.
I think my favorite video game of all time is Metal Gear Solid 2. And I'll concede that my love of Metal Gear Solid probably stems from it being my first game and all. But 2 is what I personally believe to be the best entry in the series. It's grown on me so much over time. And I think that game is responsible for my sort of love of story-driven games, which is why I think to say anything else would be just sort of denying like such a huge part of why I wanted to do this.
For me, the answer is Final Fantasy IX, because it does the best things with the best tropes of JRPGs, my opinion.
And I think my favorite, I have a hardest time pinning down one game in general. Just kind of can shift from day to day. But I think today my favorite's Disco Elysium. I think it mastered the concept of what a visual novel game should be, while also having some of the best writing in any game ever, best characters in any game ever, and just general concept and design is just some of the best work I've ever seen especially from a first time development company. All right, so moving on, what is your favorite all time favorite work of fiction? It could be a movie, a book, a video game, any fictional work that you found to be the best thing that you had come across.
All right, so here's where we're gonna trash it up a little bit.
Oh baby, oh baby.
Yeah. So for my favorite work of fiction, I am going to have to pick because anything else would be lying, even though I have read and watched better things. Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann.
Oh, okay. You know what? I get it. I get it. I've seen it too. I love it. I think my all-time favorite work of fiction is The X-Files. I watch it like every few years during October. Well, to be honest, this year it's kind of spilled over out of October, but it's such a great series. It's highly acclaimed for a reason, and it's just awesome.
I think today. Oh man, I think today I'm gonna say my favorite fictional series of all time is going to be Adventure Time. While I don't think it's my favorite piece of media, I do think it's one of the best shows as far as world building, like consistent good world building paired with interesting storylines that are both digestible for children and interesting for adults, which is something that I feel like a lot of shows don't accomplish these days anymore. So that's going to be my pick. We'll move on to our next question, which is what is the worst game you've ever played? And you can take that to any interpretation you like, that you still love. For me, I do think this isn't a bad game necessarily, but it is a game that is generally considered to be pretty mediocre by most of the critics and fans, and that was Eastward. It was a game that I got to play earlier this year, a little indie game. And I loved it. There are definitely elements where the gameplay and everything isn't super exciting, but I really love the story. I love the art that they created, the pixel art especially. And I while I wish it was just a little better, I still have like a place in my heart for that game because I do just really love some of the things that they were able to accomplish.
I think the worst game I ever played and still love was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 1. It was considered groundbreaking sort of for the time, but I know that a lot of people's opinions on it for the story, the how the game looked, the combat system has really soured over time. But I could go back to that game today and just like play the absolute crap out of it because like I don't know, maybe it's nostalgia. In it being so groundbreaking, it taught me a lot about like what a cool good game is, and you know maybe the story is full of cliches, maybe it is a little basic, but it's you know a lot of the individual characters are very well thought out. And I think the game is just like I don't know, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
So my game for this is actually also a BioWare game.
Mm.
Uh, Mine is actually kind of had the opposite experience. A lot of people, when this first game first came out, were really mad about it and really disliked it for a lot of reasons. Some of them probably valid, but it's actually been so long since I played this game that I don't remember it as well as I would like to, but I do remember loving it. Like when I played it, I never stopped playing it, and that game is Dragon Age Inquisition, which nowadays, when I see people talk about it, when that game came out, people did not like it. But nowadays, when I see people talk about it, it seems like there's a lot more positive reception for it, which I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about that later. Podcasts from
Right.
now.
And then our final question is, if you could create a game, you have like an unlimited budget, you have access to the team that you need. If you could create a game based on any experience, what would you want it to be, and how would you like to portray it?
I'll go first here.
Oh hell yeah!
So this is gonna be really lame. I just want FromSoft to make a Dark Souls robot game. That's all I want.
Like sci-fi inspired, you mean?
Well, no, I mean like Armored Core, but more Dark
Oh,
Soulsy.
like a mech kind of thing.
The dearth of giant robot action games is an abomination on this industry.
That's like incredibly surprising because you would think that would be like one of the very first easiest things that you can do a bunch of cool stuff with.
Well, a lot of anime licensed robot games are strategy games, and even the not licensed games like Front Mission and Sakura Wars are all strategy based. But I just want modern robot action games, but there's just none
You
besides some
you
indie games.
you want to shoot and kill and go fast and it to be cool.
Yes.
I get it. I get it. I'm kind of a sucker for post-apocalyptic games. I think some people have explored this idea in sort of a comedic way. I always thought of like this is going to sound grim, but I think it would make a cool game, like a nuclear war, post-bomb like community building sort of thing where you are bunkered up in your house, and you have to like make decisions like do you let people come stay with you, like do you go out and scavenge, and it's been explored in like funny ways. Like I think the game's called 60 Seconds to Die, or maybe just called 60 Seconds.
I think it's just called 60 Seconds
Yeah,
now.
where you just play like a dad putting his family in a bomb bunker, and it's very like it's meant to be read very comedically and things like that. But I think like a serious tonal game that had like heavy like decision making and consequences and like some kind of cool message to say. I think that would go so hard.
For me, I've been playing a lot of games this year about kind of death and loss. So, which is a lot of those games do explore themes of what it means to have loss, like what it means to go through loss, what it means to process loss, and what it means to kind of like go through death. I would love to see a game kind of about concepts of the afterlife that explore different religions' approaches to the afterlife in a very respectable manner. I'm not sure how gameplay would look for that, but just like a way that's kind of exploring all of these different spaces in a way that can be respectable to all of them and give people kind of perspective on all of the different cultures of the world and how they view what life looks like after death. Any other introductory things that people would like to bring up before we get into the meat of this episode?
I think I got it all out of me.
I'm also good. I'm ready to talk about our main topic.
Great. Well, without further ado, let me introduce our game for today. And today we are going to be talking about a lovely indie game that came out back in 2021, mid 2021. This game is called Road 96. It was a adventure video game, as they say it, but for some people, we would be calling it a walking simulator or a sort of like choose your own adventure simulator. Somewhere in a similar vein of like a Life is Strange or a Telltale game, something of that nature. It was developed by a French studio called Digix Art. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The game is about you playing a string of teenagers trying to escape a tyrannical regime. You are looking to flee the country, but mostly you're kind of a face in the crowd. The game really revolves around a set of characters.
So the main characters that your series of teenagers over the game interact with are Zoe, a fellow teenager on the run, whose father works within the tyrannical government. You have Sonia, a news broadcaster for a government propaganda network, who drives around the country partying in her limo. You have Stan and Mitch, a couple of down on their luck, kind of dopey criminal types who are in pretty bad financial hardship and get up to like almost like sitcom bank robber type scenarios. You have Fanny, the cop, who works in a special division of the tyrannical government's police called Road Control, whose job is to round up teenagers trying to flee the country. You have Alex, who is a boy genius, as well as Fanny's adopted son, who is a very, very young teenager, not fleeing the country, but on a road trip and struggling with being involved in some radical political groups. You have John Ursus, who is a very like an older truck driver who takes part in these same radical political groups that Alex does, however, has a very different perspective on what they should be doing based on some events that happened before the game. And finally, you have Jared, who is kind of an insane, murderous taxi driver who's out to get revenge for the people that he finds responsible for the death of his daughter.
And yeah, so the director for this game, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this correctly, is Yon Fenice. I want to say that's right, but it is French. So apologies if I'm not pronounced that correctly. And yeah, so let's get right into it. For me, I want to say that the big point of this game is kind of portraying people living under a tyrannical regime and the different things that happen as a result of that, the different experiences that people have as a result of living under that, and the different things, the different ways that people approach it to have the most of what they believe, the most they can get out of their lives is. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so I do think that is exactly what this game is trying to do, and I think it's pretty interesting how you as a player experience it, because one thing for me running throughout the game, and I don't know what order we're going to talk about these things is you can, as a character, play off like you know about everything everyone is talking about and miss out on actual information if you don't ask about it. Which was an interesting experience that I had. But I was pretty fascinated with this world right off the bat, just experiencing how everyone was living and how people reacted to you playing as the teenager who is supposedly running away.
I think that a lot of the game, I don't know, there's kind of some weird, in my mind, kind of discordant things happening here, where a lot of the game's main story is driven by characters who are not the player, and that's understandable because the player plays like a series of like 7 or 8 different characters over the course of the game. However, what the character chooses has a very heavy-handed decision in what these like NPCs who are actually driving the story really do. And I found that like a little personally like hard to digest, but pulled off in like a not bad kind of way. I also we might talk about this later, but I am not sure what the country that the game takes place in is supposed to be analogous to. If it's supposed to be analogous to any real world country, it's called Petria, which I think the name is a reference to the fact that in the game their like main export is crude oil, like petrol oil.
Fuels.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if it's supposed to be like America or if it's supposed to be France or maybe like Brazil, like a place with a bunch of crude oil.
based off the environments, I almost want to say it's based off of a Middle Eastern country, just like a
Mhm.
faceless Middle Eastern country. But I don't. My inclination is that they're not really trying to pin it to any one country, and the intent in leaving a lot of the landscape featureless is that it's supposed to be above a step above. It's not just like one. It's not supposed to be analogous to any one
Well,
country or even a place.
yeah, I think the point is it could be anywhere because it
Yeah.
could
Yeah,
happen anywhere, right?
I don't know. I found that like particular. It's always good to think like, oh, are they trying to anchor this to some real world place? But
for
there's
sure.
there's like deserts and like lush forests, and there's like a million different accents among the players, and that might be like constraint of the. That might be on purpose, and it might be like a constraint of like what voice act talent they had available for a small project like this. I don't really know.
The country is also huge.
Yeah, it's gigantic.
Let's get into like let's talk about the kind of the gameplay a little bit. I describe this as a walking simulator for lack of a better term. I do think that one of the things I do struggle with this game is that some of your choices aren't necessarily as important, but they more self-contain themselves within the different kind of vignettes that you go through. But for the most part, you are kind of walking around. You have different vignettes that you get to see with all the different characters. You get to kind of give your inputs into those different scenarios, your thoughts. But for the most part, it is kind of a story-driven game in so much as there is a lot of dialogue. Your choices do matter, but only to like a certain extent, right?
Yeah. There are a series of outcomes in the game that mostly happen towards the end of the game that can be influenced by your choices in one way or another. The main one is the big one is the ending of the game. Do y'all mind if I kind of run through that real quick?
Go for it.
There's three endings that can happen. One where this one I believe is pretty unlikely to happen. The tyrannical ruler of the country wins re-election and everything gets worse. This is like the bad ending. And then there's two endings where the tyrannical ruler loses to his more liberal challenger in the election that takes place over the course of the game. One in which a violent protest happens on election day, and one where it doesn't. Over the course of the game, as you make choices that include things like vandalizing propaganda posters, pushing political actors to be more or less violent, voicing your sentiment to simply leave the country instead of partaking in the political process, things like that, you're kind of putting weights on a big three-way scale, and then at the end of the game, the scale with the most weight is the ending you get, is what I would kind of liken it to. And at the end of every sort of teenager, which are, I guess, analogous to like levels in another game, you get a little vision of the future for where your game is headed.
So to kind of maybe take a step back from the endings and the choice mattering thing, I always think it's interesting when we come to these kinds of games where people talk about your choice mattering. There are people who I think unfairly level criticism on games who talk about their choice mattering, but there's only three endings, especially for like an indie game like this. But to kind of maybe step back a little bit, I think a lot of this game, where your choices that you do in individual scenarios matter, is how the other characters choose to continue through the world, right?
Yeah.
Right.
There are a lot of places where you make an individual choice that may or may not end up changing something in one of the set three endings, but changes how your future characters are going to interact with other characters.
Each of us does have some issues with the gameplay, but let's kind of get into the main meat kind of the backbone of this experience, which I think is the story and the characters. So let's kind of segue into this a little bit, and let's have each of us take one moment from the game, whether it was a full vignette or like one specific small character interaction, and kind of give our audience a breakdown of what it was, what happens, just paint kind of a visual picture for folks, and then we'll kind of take some time to discuss each of these moments amongst ourselves and what they meant to us. Go ahead.
So like the moment I would talk about after our just sort of previous conversation, I want to highlight like one part I think the game deals with choices like very well. One of the times you could tell they put a lot of thought into it is in one of the vignettes. You come upon Alex, the boy genius, clearly building like a bomb, and he says, "Oh, I'm working with this sort of political dissident group, the Black Brigades, is what they're called. There's only one." And he says they've contracted me. There's this guy. He's the leader, and he wants me to build this for him. It's just like the violent attack that happened 10 years ago. And your teenager, whoever you're controlling at that point in the game, when you come upon it, can either urge Alex like, "Hey, man, you shouldn't do this. This is clearly going to hurt people," or you can say like, "No, like the protest might need something like this. You know, like it's gonna get bad." And you can influence him to be responsible for building like a big bomb that's for like a plotted terrorist attack at the end of the game. And seeing like in my playthrough, I tried to play like as radically politically violent as possible to see like what the ramifications at the end of the game would be. And like holy cow, like I had him like building the bomb and stuff, and it turned out like it's like a disaster. And of course the game foreshadows like that it's gonna be a disaster and it's like a bad idea. You get to the end of the game and like all the can I get into stuff about the ending, or do we want to cover that later?
No, I mean this is your moment. Talk about how your moment plays out.
Yeah, like at the end of the game, you come to sort of reckon with the consequences of your actions, and Fanny, Alex's adopted mother, has to like watch her child die in a protest, and like shoots one of the Black Brigades in the back as he's running away, and like her world crumbles, and it's like, oh wow, like I got that specific experience, that bit of the ending, because I chose to make the world like a little bit more like violent and worse. And it's like I have to think about the consequences of that. I thought like that was executed like super well.
And even I know in your playthrough you allowed Zoe to die at the border. Um, so even in that made the difference in Alex dying, because in my playthrough, where I kind of did a similar, I wouldn't say I advocated for the political violence as much as you did in your playthrough and kind of looking for the ramifications of that. But in my playthrough, I did have Zoe survive. And then at kind of the big protest at the end, Zoe was the one who ended up getting shot instead of Alex. Obviously, I'm not sure if the creation of the bomb was necessarily the reasoning behind him ending up being the one getting shot at the border, but it is interesting to see like the full ramifications of things there at the end, and just the little decisions that end up mattering more than you thought they did.
Oh yeah.
To kind of jump into just the bomb thing, I don't know if it does. I had a vignette where I convinced Alex not to make the bomb, but I was talking to John, and he was upset about the leader of the Black Brigade asking Alex to make the bomb. And I also had a politically violent ending.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So just to fill you in, Mason. So what happens is if you do convince Alex to not build the bomb in one way or another, the brigades end up stealing his blueprints and manufacturing one themselves.
Oh, okay. I got
So
you.
there ends up being a bomb at the border either way. It's just a matter of who is culpable in the situation.
So was the interaction between John, Alex, and Fanny different at the end of the game for you, Buck?
So I saved Zoe at the border. That was my one teenager death. We can talk stats on that later.
Oh yeah.
I saved Zoe at the border, and Fanny still shot the brigade, and Alex went to join the protest. But in mine, Zoe comes in and is shot because the tyrannical leader orders for them to shoot on the protesters, but Alex doesn't die.
Yeah, that's the same. That's the same outcome that I had in my first playthrough.
And did Fanny kill John?
Yes.
Okay, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That brings me into another thing I hate. God, Fanny is the worst. She's best.
But it's good.
No,
it's good.
She's the best depiction of a cop ever. But
Yeah.
holy cow, I hate her. Oh man, she's like the cause of like every bad thing that happens almost.
It's very interesting.
Jeez.
She also does her job so inconsistently.
Yeah.
Just on your point, I guess.
Maybe it's because like
She's my second favorite written character in the game, and it's just because of how efficiently the writing makes you like flip flop on her character, where you can, because you can see moments where she really wants to like do the correct thing, the morally correct thing, but ultimately, because she is a cop, she feels obligated to do the bidding of a tyrannical regime. And I think that there is the way they do it is very, it feels tasteful and it feels really well done, honestly.
yeah, I mean like no, yeah, I agree with that. It's just like I think she was written to cause like frustrations to like show you how like ineffectual like someone working within a corrupt and broken system like an individual should be, because at some points she's like, oh, this like down on her luck like plucky cop, and her car breaks down and she's like, oh, like funny, and then like you get to other scenes and it's like you see her act under pressure and she just starts absolutely terrorizing people. She's like holding up a bus full of innocent people with a gun and like threatening to jail teenagers who are just like staying at a motel unless they do her like police work for her and stuff. It's like, holy cow, like
Yeah.
you're like actually she was like a monster.
Yeah, I think one of the key things in this game is, you know, when we go back to that theme of like people living on a tyrannical regime, there is, you look at the difference in power dynamics between people directly benefiting from the tyrannical regime, which is Sonia, Fanny, Stan and Mitch, which we can talk about, and versus the people that are not directly, and I guess technically Zoe to an extent, versus the people that are not directly beneficiaries of the tyrannical regime. You know, John, Alex, especially Gerard. Like exploring that dichotomy and like how it affects characters' motivations, how it affects their um, dynamics with each other is just like, is definitely the high point of the game for me, is like them really being able to develop those characters in that way of the beneficiaries versus the not, and allowing them to like play in that space with each other.
On that note, can I talk about my
Your moment?
like big scene?
Yeah,
Please
go
do.
for it.
Please do.
Yeah. So my like the thing that got the most visceral reaction from me was actually really early. It was my first interaction with Sonia. I am walking into this some kind of ceremony thing, and I see protesters as I walk up.
Oh, I
And
know
then
the one you're talking about.
And, you know, they tell me, walk on, kid. And I do. And so I walk down to Sonia, and now my teenager is almost dead, no money. And Sonia offers me a job. Film this guy, I think you end up finding out it's Zoe's dad, talking about the opening of an oil mine, I think, an oil processing plant or something. And your job is to film it and also tell the crowd to cheer or boo based off of the correct way a propaganda news channel would want you to do it. And on the offer of money so that my teenager doesn't die, I actually start out with like giving them one cheer. And then I'm like, oh god, I hate this. And so I end up only giving them one cheer, and then when he continues to talk about
Iraq.
like yeah, it talks about Tyrak, I just don't do anything. He talks about Tyrak's opponent and I don't do anything. I'm just kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. And then the protesters show up. And what you can do is you can turn the camera to look at the protesters as they show up, and then cops go to run and beat them into the ground.
Yeah.
And you can film that. Not that it really does anything, but I thought it was interesting that at the end of that exchange, Sonya still paid me for doing quite a mediocre job, and that kid ended up getting out. And I thought, on the note of how does a person, survive in a fascistic regime, specifically in this, kind of fantasy world setting where a kid can just walk on the road forever and not effectively get caught by the road patrol. I thought that was super interesting because I did compromise on my beliefs a little bit just to survive. And I think that was a very effective way of portraying that kind of thing.
Oh yeah. Can I ask you this? Do you remember how much Sonya paid you?
I do not. It was like $60 maybe.
So I had played this game before we had started planning this podcast, and to watch it there and to bone up for the podcast, I watched my fiance play the game. She got that exact event. Maybe everyone gets it. She got that event and she did like a really good job for Sonya. She like it was one of her first events, so she didn't know that like Tyrak was like evil or whatever. Sonya paid her a ton of money. Enough she had like $4 going into that, and she had like almost 100 coming out of it because Sonya gives you like a bonus if you do good propaganda. It is so easy. I mean, this is probably obvious given the themes of the game, but like if you like shill out to Tyrak, like your life gets so easy.
Well, and this isn't my like one scene, but like I feel like there's no scene that really portrays that better than the scene in the limo with Sonya where you end up tripping out and then like she's like having a moral dilemma of like whether she's doing the right thing. Because like on her face, Sonya's really good about always keeping this appearance up that she's, very pro Tyrak and she's like grateful for the things that she's benefited in her life. But there's like two moments of like moral clarity for her. One of which is the scene with at the Rockfall where she almost gets assassinated by Drod, and the other one is that scene in the limo. It's always the double-edged sword of where are the lines drawn for you? Where at what point are you? How much of your morality as a person are you willing to give up in pursuit of wealth or status or power or whatever? Where do you draw that line? And I think the cool thing about Sonya as a character is it always feels like she's approaching it, but she never gets there.
I think what I find interesting is like where all of the different characters are at in terms of what they gain in terms of being immoral, and like how that changes how you view them, right? Because all the teenagers, and maybe this is partially because you're playing them and you have to sort of self-insert, what they gain in exchange for supporting Tyrak is they get to survive another day. But Sonya, what she gains is her luxurious life gets a little bit more luxurious. So she's not like, you're not getting the same thing in exchange, and you're not at the same starting point. The same is also true of Fanny. It's very clear throughout the course of the game that Fanny has other points of like moral clarity and that kind of thing, but she's getting like just like a middle class life in exchange for like being a tool of Tyrak.
Yeah, and I think that kind of shows through in the fact that she can kind of fall apart, because I think part of Fanny's attempts at being sympathetic is she's not Sonya, right?
Yeah.
Because my thing with Sonya is I do think Sonya is an interesting character, but her being willing to just sacrifice her assistant dude,
Oh,
uh,
Adam?
yeah,
That guy's stupid. I hate him.
I
Adam.
don't know anything about him besides watching him almost get dropped off a building. Uh, is that like Sonya doesn't really have repercussions for her actions, and Fanny doesn't really either, except for the fact that Fanny actually has to deal with the oppressed populace, where Sonya can ride in her theoretically armored limo and not worry about it, you know?
Oh yeah, I never thought about that. That's a good point. Maybe that's why it comes so much easier to Sonya. Maybe that's why Sonya has so many fewer like points in the game where she like shows any regret at all.
I guess I'll get into my kind of keystone moment here. So you're walking along the road, you eventually stumble upon this old abandoned trailer park. You are alone.
Yeah.
You peel back some kind of like pieces of roofing, and you're able to like enter this like old abandoned facility, and you find a baseball bat. And there's like this like fun like preppy moment of you going around and just like bashing stuff, table like old furniture and tables and chairs and like piles of like cans, and then Gerard shows up. And I know we haven't talked a lot about Gerard yet, but Gerard is a man on a mission to right what he believes is wrong. Your teenagers a lot of the times in scenarios with Gerard have a very high likelihood of being murdered by him.
Yep.
I would say probably 80% of the scenarios that you experience with Gerard can end in your character being killed. So Gerard, and it's interesting because for me, I experienced this moment later, so I knew about the dangers, and so seeing him, it's like, oh, I need to be on my toes for the rest of this encounter. And so Gerard brings you around to kind of this centerpiece of the compound or the trailer park, where there is this big abandoned radio antenna that's been set up. He asks you to destroy it with him, and so the two of you like just go to town, and Gerard is like angrily screaming like things of ideations of rage at the Black Brigades and rage at life in general, essentially. And then after you destroy it, the two of you sit down, have a drink, and he tells you about his daughter. And this is really like the first time we get to see a more human side of Gerard, where he just wants to talk about his daughter. He talks about how she was growing up and what she was into, and it turns out that she joined the Black Brigades of her own, kind of for what he believes was influenced by one of her mentors. Eventually, that was what led to her dying, was her joining this organization. And as he kind of like tries to begin to process his grief, he flares up again and gets mad. And instead of killing you, he just tells you to leave. And as you exit the scene, you can kind of hear in the background Gerard shooting, probably with abandon, but who we don't really have a clear picture what he's shooting at. And then you do get to kind of exit. And that scene really stuck with me because as time has gone by, I think Gerard is actually the best written character in Road 96 because he is like the core of rage in the game. He is the core of anger in the game. There's the Black Brigades, which are this underground kind of like political, advocating for some political violence organization. And there's the police, raging against the people. And then obviously there's a tyrant at the top kind of just watching it all burn. There's something just so visceral about one man's journey of revenge and it being so all-encompassing against all of the people that he thinks have wronged him, the people that wronged his daughter, that scene just allowing him to have a moment and allowing you to share in that moment of clarity for him, that just feels so powerful in a way that like is hard to pin down without necessarily understanding all of the other interactions that you have with him as a character.
So that's another thing where I wish I could have maybe messed with Gerard more. Like, for example, there is a scene where you're in his taxi and he talks about picking up a VCR analog. I don't think it's literally called a VCR, it's called something else. Anyway, when his taxi breaks down during this scene, you have the chance to put in a tape that appears to be of his daughter. And boy, was I tempted to do that, but I absolutely did not. The whole interactions with Gerard are super interesting to me because most of this game was chill to me, but they like to jump scare you with him.
Yes.
And I was always just terrified of him all the time. I think that was another thing they did very well, is they made him scary.
He's menacing.
Yeah. Yeah. You never see him without like a gun, and he's all the only like most of the ways that you are introduced to him, he's like threatening you with a gun. He's like, all right, you're going to do what I say or you're going to die. Or maybe you're also going to die if you do what I say. I'll make a choice later.
In some ways, he's almost like Two-Face, where it's really just like a coin flip, right? He something horrible has happened to him, and he is going to make a split-second decision based off of like how he's feeling, you know, a coin flip more or less.
He did. He killed 2 of my teens.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't. I really, and that's the thing is like Gerard is just so like the moment with the tapes. There are just so many moments where you're like your fear keeps you from exploring more, and there's just something so good about that where it's like I desire to know more about this character, but I'm afraid of like the ramifications of doing so.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I've honestly never experienced that in a video game, or like that exact feeling of I want to see what's on this, and in any other game I would, but I want to survive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm gonna not.
One of the times I died, I really pushed Gerard as far as he will go. And it does not take much pushing. He will kill you for like almost nothing. So I don't know if y'all got the scene. Do y'all get the scene where he kidnaps you in the hotel?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
for the listeners, there is a scene where your kid can sleep outside of a motel because you don't have any money, and while you sleep, Gerard will come scoop you off the streets and drag you into his hotel room. And a lot of things happen, but eventually you find out that he's killed a cop who was giving him trouble, and he needs your help to sort of talk to the hotel owner and like do a bunch of tasks for him while he disposes of the body in the bathtub. And I decided this was like one of my earliest interactions with Gerard, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not just gonna sit here and be held hostage or whatever. One of the first thing that happens is the motel owner walks by and he's like, "Hey, you doing good over there?" You can clearly see Gerard standing behind the door with the gun pointed at you, just like saying, like, "All right, you better say the right thing." And I thought, there's no way he's gonna kill both me and this motel owner. I think my only way to escape is to tell the motel owner what's happening here and maybe run away. And I was like, help, there's a guy with I didn't even finish the sentence. He killed us both, just like immediately. He will go off and he does not care how many people he kills.
Yep. Yeah, if you play out that scene, you end up. This is a little. There obviously was trigger warning at the start. If you play out that scene, he ends up dissolving the cop's body in that bathtub with gasoline.
Holy cow!
Like it. Like it's so funny to me because, as Buck said, a lot of this game, even though there's like the political under themes and like undertones and like this like current of political violence, it's still there's still this like air of being a little carefree, of being a little colorful, especially with the music. I think the music for me, the tapes you find lying around that have kind of like lighter tones and like poppy music, which serves as like a nice foil to like all of the horrible things that are going on. But man, there's something about Gerard's scenes where it's just like it just brings you back into the reality and like actually makes you aware of all the horrible things that are going on, because Stan and Mitch are just so silly and funny and like all their incompetence, so it's like a good time. And like Sonia is like a larger than life personality who like isn't really aware of the consequences of her actions all of the time,
And
or
her
at least
off-screen accent as well.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so like so many of the characters, like even John to an extent is just so like friendly and outgoing, and like even though he has all this like inner drama and inner conflict, is still like just at the end of the day a good person to you, and like all the times you come across him. And then there's just Gerard, who is this complete force of nature and does not like is not willing to give any quarter to anybody because he believes that he has been wronged by everyone.
I think he serves an incredibly important narrative role too, because it would be very easy to write a game about like an unquestionable force of evil, the government, and an unquestionable force of good, the Black Brigades. But Gerard's there to illustrate that things are not better under the Black Brigades necessarily,
Yeah.
because the things they choose to do that are violent cause real human sacrifices, real violent human sacrifices. People's lives are changed. He's there to show you that like we're gonna give you the choice to be violent, to be as radical as possible, but you are gonna have to reckon with the idea that these human sacrifices are not just like people in a video game. We're going to put your face up to it, and we're going to make you understand that these actions are going to have consequences too. You're going to ruin people's lives in a way that is comparable to how Tyrak ruins people's lives.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What one other moment I want to talk about. This was going to be my second choice, is if I had one moment to discuss, is the first. So when you are escaping the country, essentially there are a bunch of different escape routes that each escape route you get one shot at. So there's one where you can take an exam to go be allowed to work outside the country. There's one where you hide inside of a tractor trailer. There's one where you hire someone to smuggle you out of the country. But the one that always stuck out to me was when you climb the mountain. And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
there's the air of fear of like being high on a mountain, and I don't have any climbing material and I might fall. But that wasn't what struck for me. It was the when you see that dynamite for the first time
Right.
Yeah.
and you realize, one, this dynamite is here because they do routine detonations to make sure that there is not a substantial avalanche every year. And two, the rock slide that killed all the people, all those years ago was caused by Tyrak.
Yep.
No one knows this because, well, one, obviously the government covered it up, but two, no one ever comes up on this mountain to do anything other than flee. And so they're not going to come back down into this country and tell people what's really going on. And so like yes, the events of that rock slide happened as a result of political activism from the Black Brigades, but that moment of realization where you as a player get to go, oh, now I know the story. I know the real story, and now that's gonna change how I view all of these characters and also their affiliations.
Oh, yeah. And none of the individual characters have the full story, right? They only have their limited perspective, and you get to see the entire thing, which is like I don't know. It's incredibly well done. I think.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too because Mason, you keep mentioning the Black Brigades being very violent, and the leader is, but I got a scene where there was where you can sneak in to a bar where the Black Brigades are meeting, and it's very interesting. But the way it ends is you watch as tension is mounting, and the leader of the Black Brigades wants violence to happen, and John does not. And there is a vote, and it is tied. You have to make a choice. Well, you don't have to make a choice. You can actually choose to not make a choice. But I think it's really interesting because that is actually the problem I had with the brigades throughout the whole thing. Is I wasn't going to trust tyranny offhand, but I also wasn't just going to trust rebels against tyranny without knowing a little bit more about what they want. And I think an interesting issue with the brigades is they don't know exactly what they want. They don't know what the best way to accomplish what they're trying to do is. I think that's very poignant when it comes to how do you fight something like fascism, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where, I personally, I am mostly against violence, but I did advocate for a violent ending to this particular story because I didn't see a voting way out of it. You can vote, but who's to say Tyrak won't try to hold power anyway, right? There's no why if you can't trust him to run your country now, why would you trust him to listen to voting, respecting the results of an election?
And to your point, there's actually a lot of lines of dialogue that imply that Tyrak is attempting to fix the election.
I don't remember honestly what I did in that scene, but I had mostly advocated for violence, revolution throughout. Because, and the main reason I chose that is just because I have to deal with voting my way up in real life.
Yeah.
And there's no.
Yeah.
There's no. There is no realistic. At least personally for me, I don't see very many realistic ways to prevent my country from going into fascistic tendencies, but voting. Sorry if that's too spicy.
I don't mind that.
And I just wanted to go for it this time through and try it that way. But I do think the brigades are interesting in that you don't know, you never really know if they're trying to do the best good for everyone or not. Mainly because of the tension between John and the leader. Because the leader seems, I know it's because they make John sympathetic and the leader not sympathetic, but he seems not to just want the best thing for everyone, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So the leader's name, this is something I wanted to get into specifically because I found it very interesting about how they wrote the leader. The leader of the Black Brigades is named Robert, and he has three sort of major story interactions in the game. Number one, the scene you talked about is a scene that happens in every playthrough, the one where you vote on if the Black Brigade chooses to be more violent or not, where he takes advantage of a teenager to get his political ends. You see several vignettes with Alex, where Alex talks about a guy named Robert wanting him to build a bomb, which is him taking advantage of a teenager to gain his political ends. And I don't know if y'all caught this, Robert is the science teacher who pushed Gerard's daughter to be in the Black Brigades. So his main way of achieving his political ends is through abusing teenagers, taking advantage of them.
I did not catch that.
And the reason he does that is because teenagers are very. This is a country where teenagers are very malleable because already teenagers are trying to leave the country. So it's like, well, why instead of leaving the country, why don't you stay and fight for me, and I'll help make things correct, right?
Yeah. The reason, so me picking up that it was Robert happened in the Stan and Mitch event where you try and help them find when Gerard will attack. In one of the letters, Gerard's daughter references the science teacher Robert, who brought her into the Black Brigades. It's it's a detail. All he does is find these most
vulnerable,
vulnerable and most disadvantaged people, from the current regime, and he's like, "All right, you're going to be my sort of actors of violence." Also, a
Yeah.
fun thing that if you help Gerard as much as possible, did y'all have the event where he has the person stuck in his trunk?
Yeah.
There's a series of choices you can make where Gerard learns the Black Brigade's location, and the person in his trunk isn't a rando. It's like actually Robert.
Mm.
Yeah, he
Oh,
can actually kidnap Robert and kill him.
huh.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like the thing of I feel like the brigades in a lot of ways do reflect a lot of real world political dissident groups where it is a collective of people who don't like the current political systems but don't necessarily like you don't really ever get a gauge of like what their ideals are when they
Hmm.
replace when they're like if you're successful let's and the black brigades if you choose to support them do end up being successful i would I would say if you are successful then what's next. I think as a result of the black brigades not really having a good concept of what they wanted next just end up putting the liberal opponent of Tyrak
In
in
power.
power essentially. And so, is that good enough for you? Did you want more? But the fact that they never really voice these opinions to a player makes me almost think that yes, they wanted change, but no, they never really had a concept.
Hmm.
And
And
in my ending, it said like specifically, Flores, who's Tyrak's liberal opponent, takes office, and she's still too far to the center. Like she
yeah,
exists too far to the right for the brigades. So even their ideal world that they create with as much power, like they're not even
I,
close to getting what they want.
and I kind of want to take us into talking about the endings a little bit. This seems like a good as place in any
Hmm.
transition. So, I think that's a perfect segue for us to get into the endings a little bit. So the interesting thing to me about this game is there is what I perceive as an outsider to be sort of a center left view of the world. No one in this game, no like real political organization in this game that you ever get to have direct contact with is really portrayed in the best light. I think there is an idea that Flores, who is again the political candidate running against Tyrak, is like sort of quote unquote the only way out. But I think in spite of that, because your three endings are you leave the country to kind of just be off to its own devices and you don't really you kind of just basically leave Tyrek in control. You do well enough to convince the people of the country to vote for Flores, and Flores does in fact win the election, and that is the respected outcome, even though it does require the event at the border to have that happen. And there's the ending where you support the Black Brigades, and the Black Brigades successfully mount a week-long protest, which ends up still with Flores being in power. And I think if you just think about it from a political perspective of it sure sucks that that's the best outcome that you can achieve where Flores just ends up in control and things get better but not that much better, at least immediate in the intermediary. I think if you look at it from a more, I guess, existential or like moralistic perspective of even though people can try so much and put so much action behind things, most of the time the needle is not gonna move that far or as hard as you would like. You are like it is so hard to go from a tyrannical regime, a top right type of regime to bringing it over into a more, you know, idealistic society. And I think there's something kind of powerful in that idea of like as much as you want society to change, society is not necessarily going to be willing to change for you if you don't put in the time and preparation to prepare it for it.
One thing I do want to note in terms of you never really get everything out of each political thing. You definitely know Tyrak is a dickhead
Oh
because
yeah.
Oh yeah.
when the ending starts, your kid is in a prison with another kid who you've seen throughout your travels, and he gets like shaved, tortured, so on and so forth. Just so we're clear, Tyrak definitely bad, and anything that is not Tyrak might be preferable.
Yeah, I think the main point I want to say is like Flores as a character is basically an enigma. You
Mhm.
don't really get to know her at all.
Yeah.
Um,
Besides people supporting her and not really giving any insight into it.
Correct.
but like I do think I agree with you that there's sort of a, and I don't think, if you want me to edit this out I will, but like I think it's no surprise that all three of us are like pretty far left guys, at least as far as United States politics goes. I would find it if you could just like flip the country on a dime to a super far left Black Brigade like ideal regime. I would think that would be kind of a crazy, not well written ending, just because
All
like
right.
you meet
Yeah.
so many Tyrak supporters. Like it's very clear Tyrak has a lot of popular support in the country. It would be
And
crazy if you could just institute a leftist regime.
and not to mention the Black Brigades coerce businesses into cooperating with them.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
through
don't get me wrong.
violence.
Don't get
Uh,
me wrong. I think it would be absolutely be a bit of a cop out if they did install a leftist regime. I just think that the way that the game ends up skewing works in the favor of a bigger narrative as far as the world doesn't change the way you want it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is interesting, right? Because you don't really get many stories that end that way.
Yeah.
You often get like edgelord stories that are like everything is terrible and everyone dies, or you get the opposite of where everything is great right after, right? But I think this conclusion that you get with Flores being in power, the Black Brigade still not being super happy with it, accepting it, is probably a very realistic and reasonable ending to achieve, besides, the teenagers abandoning.
Yeah.
Also, another
Yeah.
small note as far as the game mechanics are concerned, we've spoken a lot about how like the ending that you generally will get is a Flores ending winning. Flores winning ending. It is super hard to have the ending where Tyrak wins. You generally have to aim solely for that. When my fiance played through the game, she chose a lot of the options that are supposed to weight towards Tyrak winning and still got the liberal Flores winning ending.
And so I think with that, we've kind of come full circle. There's a lot of things about this game that we didn't get to discuss, but before I begin to bring us to a close, are there any like last kind of things you guys would like to hit on?
How many of your teenagers survived?
I think I had so my first playthrough, I think I only had one. I got one get killed, and I had one not make it to the border due to like sleeping on the side of the road and getting arrested. So the rest of them made it out, which was like I want to say six.
I had three teenagers die. I had none get arrested. And Haley, my fiance, had none die and two get arrested.
Oh man, I feel like I missed out. All of my teenagers escaped except for I had one die for Zoe, and then my last one theoretically died in the revolution.
I think I'm
Yeah,
the only one of the three of us who killed Zoe during that event.
you are. Yeah,
I
actually.
was like, I'm not. You asked me to come along. I didn't want to come along. I'm not like dying for you. And
Yeah.
she gets
I
clapped immediately.
I thought she was a good political tool.
Yeah. So with all that being said, uh if you would like to play Road 96, if you have listened all the way through so far and you have not played the game and now you're interested, you can pick it up on Steam or pretty much any gaming platform that you have for the modern age: Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4 or 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X. And this game is available on the Xbox Game Pass. So if you are a subscriber to that, you can play this right now for free. This is a game that I would recommend to most people, especially if you are politically minded or enjoy more narratively driven games. Uh,
I even
so
think it
yeah.
works as a good introduction if you haven't played very politically high-minded games before. If you're just a fan of games that have that sort of butterfly effect, choices matter type of thing, this will be an interesting playthrough.
So with that, I want to thank all of you for listening. I would like to thank my co-hosts for being here and having this lovely discussion with me today. This is Level Zero Literacy signing off, and we hope to catch you next time.
Thanks for joining us for the first episode of Level Zero Literacy. For those of you wanting to play along for the next episode, we will be playing BioShock, available on most major gaming platforms. Thank you, and good night.